Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to be reading chapters 12 and 13. So let me go ahead and bring up our text for us all. Move this aside here. And please follow along while I read. Charlie burst through the front door, shouting, "Mother! Mother! Mother!" Mrs. Bucket was in the old grandparents' room, serving them their evening soup. "Mother!" yelled Charlie, rushing in on them like a hurricane. "Look! I've got it! Look, Mother, look! The last golden ticket, it's mine! I found some money in the street and I bought 2 candy bars, and the second one had the golden ticket, and there were crowds of people all around me wanting to see it, and the shopkeeper rescued me, and I ran all the way home, and here it is! It's the 5th golden ticket, Mother! I found it!" Mrs. Bucket simply stared while the 4 old grandparents, who were sitting up in bed balancing bowls of soup on their laps, all dropped their spoons with a clatter and froze against their pillows. For about 10 seconds there was absolute silence in the room. Nobody dared to speak or move. It was a magic moment. Then, very softly, Grandpa Joe said, "You're pulling our legs, Charlie, aren't you? You're having a little joke?" "I am not!" cried Charlie, rushing up to the bed and holding out the large and beautiful golden ticket for him to see. Grandpa Joe leaned forward and took a close look, his nose almost touching the ticket. The others watched him, waiting for the verdict. Then, very slowly, with a slow and marvelous grin spreading all over his face, Grandpa Joe lifted his head and looked straight at Charlie. The color was rushing to his cheeks, and his eyes were wide open, shining with joy. And the center of each eye, right in the very center, in the black pupil, a little spark of wild excitement was slowly dancing. Then the old man took a deep breath, and suddenly, with no warning whatsoever, an explosion seemed to take place inside of him. He threw up his arms and yelled, "Yippee!" And at the same time, his long, bony body rose up out of the bed, and his bowl of soup went flying into the face of Grandma Josephine. And in one fantastic leap, the old fellow of 96 and a half, who hadn't been out of bed these last 20 years, jumped on the floor and started doing a dance of victory in his pajamas. "Yippee!" he shouted. "3 cheers for Charlie! Hip, hip, hooray!" At this point, the door opened and Mr. Bucket walked into the room. He was cold and tired, and he looked it. All day long he had been shoveling snow in the streets. "Cripes!" he cried. "What's going on in here?" It didn't take them long to tell him what had happened. "I don't believe it," he said. "It's not possible." "Show him the ticket, Charlie," shouted Grandpa Joe, who was still dancing around the floor like a dervish in his striped pajamas. "Show your father the 5th and last golden ticket in the world." "Let me see the ticket, Charlie," shouted Grandpa Joe. "Let me see it, Charlie," Mr. Bucket said, collapsing into a chair and holding out his hand. Charlie came forward with the precious document. It was a very beautiful thing, this golden ticket, having been made, so it seemed, from a sheet of pure gold, hammered out almost to the thinness of paper. On one side of it, printed by some clever method in jet black letters, was the invitation itself from Mr. Wonka. "Read it out loud," said Grandpa Joe, climbing back into bed again at last. "Let's all hear exactly what it says." Mr. Bucket held the lovely golden ticket up close to his eyes. His hands were trembling slightly, and he seemed to be overcome by the whole business. He took several deep breaths, then he cleared his throat and said, "Ahem, ahem, ahem. All right. I'll read it. Here we go. Greetings to you, the lucky finder of the golden ticket from Mr. Willy Wonka. I shake you warmly by the hand. Tremendous things are in store for you. Many wonderful surprises await you. For now, I do invite you to come to my factory and be my guest for one whole day. You and all others who are lucky enough to find my golden tickets. I, Willy Wonka, will conduct you around the factory myself, showing you everything there is to see. And afterwards, when it is time to leave, you will be escorted home by a procession of large trucks. These trucks, I can promise you, will be loaded with enough delicious edibles to last you and your entire household for many years. If at any time thereafter you should run out of supplies, you have only to come back to the factory and show this golden ticket, and I will be happy to refill your cupboard with whatever you want. In this way, you will be able to keep yourself supplied with tasty morsels for the rest of your life. But this is by no means the most exciting thing that will happen on the day of your visit. I am preparing other surprises for you that are even more marvelous and more fantastic for all my beloved golden ticket holders. Mystic and marvelous surprises that will entrance, delight, intrigue, astonish, and perplex you beyond measure. In your wildest dreams, you could not imagine that such things could happen to you. Just wait and see. And now, here are your instructions. The day I have chosen for the visit is the first day in the month of February. On this day, and on no other, you must come to the factory gates at 10 o'clock sharp in the morning. Don't be late. And you are allowed to bring with you either one or two members of your own family to look after you and ensure that you don't get into mischief. And one more thing, be certain to have this ticket with you, otherwise you will not be admitted. Signed, Willy Wonka. The first day of February? Cried Mrs. Bucket. But that's tomorrow. Today is the last day of January. I know it is. Cripes, said Mr. Bucket. I think you're right. You're just in time, shouted Grandpa Joe. There's not a moment to lose. You must start making preparations at once. Wash your face, comb your hair, scrub your hands, brush your teeth, blow your nose, cut your nails, polish your shoes, iron your shirt, and for heaven's sake, get that mud off your pants. You must be ready, my boy. You must get ready for the biggest day of your life. Now don't overexcite yourself, Grandpa, Mrs. Bucket said, and don't fluster poor Charlie. We must all try to keep very calm. Now the first thing to decide is this. Who is going to go with Charlie to the factory? I will, shouted Grandpa Joe, leaping out of bed once again. I'll take him. I'll look after him. You leave it to me. Mrs. Bucket smiled at the old man. Then she turned to her husband and said, How about it, dear? Don't you think you ought to go? Well, Mr. Bucket said, pausing to think about it. No, I'm not so sure I should. But you must. There's no must about it, my dear, Mr. Bucket said gently. Mind you, I'd love to go. It'll be tremendously exciting. But on the other hand, I believe that the person who really deserves to go most of all is Grandpa Joe himself. He seems to know more about it than we do. Provided, of course, that he feels well enough. Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe, seizing Charlie by the hands and dancing around the room. He certainly seems well enough, Mrs. Bucket said, laughing. Yes, perhaps you're all right. Perhaps Grandpa Joe should be the one to go with him. I certainly can't go myself, and leave the other 3 old people all alone in bed for a whole day. "Hallelujah!" yelled Grandpa Joe. "Praise the Lord!" At that point, there came a loud knock on the front door. Mr. Bucket went to open it, and the next moment swarms of newspapermen and photographers were pouring into the house. They had tracked down the finder of the 5th golden ticket, and now they all wanted to get the full story for the front pages of the morning papers. For several hours, there was complete pandemonium in the little house, and it must have been nearly midnight before Mr. Bucket was able to get rid of them so that Charlie could go to bed. All right, let's go ahead and review chapter 12 very quickly. So, chapter 12. All right, now look at the way this sentence is written and think about the energy that's in it. So look at all of the ands. And. Charlie just found the golden ticket. And so when we read, we want to imagine, what is he feeling? What is he doing? How would he react? So think about it. It's just like the words like, blah, blah, blah. I found some money in the street and I bought 2 candy bars and the second one had the golden ticket and there were crowds of people all around wanting to see it and the shopkeeper rescued me and I ran all the way up and I'm here. Right? That excited, just frantic joy. So it's fun because it's a long sentence and all of those ands help tell us how we should read it. Okay, the verdict means the official answer. And so when they look at the ticket, it says the others watched him waiting for the verdict. So Grandpa Joe is looking, he's studying. I will tell you what the decision is. He will give you the final verdict. All right. Now, Grandpa Joe is, what does it say? He's 94 and a half or something like that? 96 and a half. And he hasn't been out of bed for 20 years. And yet, here he jumps on the floor and he dances around. Yippee! In his pajamas. That's silly. And here's all the other grandparents lying in bed. All right. And it says that he was dancing like a dervish. This only makes sense if you know what a dervish is. And here's a dervish. It's a particular type of dancer. I believe it's from Turkey, the country of Turkey. And so he's dancing like a dervish. He's spinning around with great joy and excitement and enthusiasm. And so this is what we call a simile. It uses the word like to describe Grandpa Joe is like a dervish. They are similar in how they're behaving. Okay, and then we've talked about time, and so we could say 10 a.m., okay, or 10 o'clock, but we can also say 10 sharp, which means exactly 10:00:00, right? Not 10:02, not 9:57, but 10 sharp, on the dot, exactly 10 o'clock. So we can, when we say, hey, let's meet at 11 o'clock sharp, means be there on time. Or please be here at 9:30 sharp. Be here at exactly 9:30. All right. Again, we get another passage here that has such urgency. Grandpa Joe is giving a whole bunch of things for Charlie to do. Do this, do that, do this, do that, do that, do this. And so we can tell because look at all these commas. Here's one thing, comma, one thing, comma, one thing, comma, one thing, comma, one thing, comma. So when we read it, we can read it with that enthusiasm. Wash your face, comb your hair, scrub your hands, brush your teeth, blow your nose, cut your nails, polish your shoes, iron your shirt, and for heaven's sake, get all that mud off your pants. Lots to do. Woohoo! Right, so much to do. It's very exciting. All right, and then it says that pandemonium broke out. And it's because all the photographers and all the newspapermen found him, and they all burst into his house, and they want to get the story. And so it's wild and crazy. So pandemonium means wild and crazy. All right. We have one more short chapter, chapter 13. So let's go ahead and quick review here. Charlie goes home and tells his family he found the golden ticket. Grandpa Joe gets out of bed and dances. The tour is tomorrow, so Charlie needs to get ready for the big event. He invites Grandpa Joe to come with him. All right, so let's go ahead and read chapter 13. The big day arrives. The sun was shining brightly on the morning of the big day, but the ground was still white with snow, and the air was very cold. Outside the gates of Wonka's factories, enormous crowds of people had gathered to watch the 5 lucky ticket holders going in. The excitement was tremendous. It was just before 10 o'clock. The crowds were pushing and shouting, and policemen with arms linked were trying to hold them back from the gates. Right beside the gates, in a small group that was carefully shielded from the crowds by the police, stood the 5 famous children, together with the grown-ups who had come with them. The tall, bony old figure of Grandpa Joe could be seen standing quietly among them, and beside him, holding tightly onto his hand, was little Charlie Bucket himself. All the children except Charlie had both their mothers and fathers with them, and it was a good thing that they had, otherwise the whole party might have gotten out of hand. They were so eager to get going that their parents were having to hold them back by force to prevent them from climbing over the gates. "Be patient," cried the fathers. "Be still. It's not time yet. It's not 10 o'clock. Behind him, Charlie Bucket could hear the shouts of the people in the crowd as they pushed and fought to get a glimpse of the famous children. "There's Violet Beauregard," he heard someone shouting. "That's her all right. I can remember her face from the newspapers." "And you know what?" somebody else shouted back. "She's still chewing that dreadful old piece of gum she's had for 3 months. You look at her jaws. They're still working on it." "Who's the fat boy?" "That's Augustus Gloop." "So it is." "Enormous, isn't he?" "Fantastic." "Who's the kid with a picture of the Lone Ranger stenciled on his windbreaker?" "That's Mike TV. He's the television fiend." "He must be crazy. Look at all those crazy pistols he's got hanging all over him." "The one I want to see is Veruca Salt," shouted another voice in the crowd. "She's the girl whose father bought up 500,000 candy bars and then made the workers in his peanut factory unwrap every one of them until they found a golden ticket. He gives her anything she wants, absolutely anything. She only has to start screaming for it, and she gets it. Dreadful, isn't it? Shocking, I call it. Which do you think is her?" "That one, over there on the left, the little girl in the silver mink coat." "Which one is Charlie Bucket?" "Charlie Bucket? He must be that skinny little shrimp standing beside the old fellow who looks like a skeleton. Right close to us, right there. You see him? Why hasn't he got a coat in this cold weather? Don't ask me. Maybe he can't afford one. Goodness me, he must be freezing." Charlie, standing only a few paces away from the speaker, gave Grandpa Joe's hand a squeeze, and the old man looked down at Charlie and smiled. Somewhere in the distance, a church clock began striking 10. Very slowly, with a loud creaking of rusty hinges, the great iron gates of the factory began to swing open. The crowd became suddenly silent. The children stopped jumping about. All eyes were fixed upon the gates. "There he is!" somebody shouted. "That's him!" And so it was. All right, so chapter 13 is very short. The children are all famous. Like, we have famous actors, right? And could you imagine how excited you would be if a famous actor came walking into our classroom? If someone like The Rock came walking in, how excited that would be? Okay, so everybody's like, "Ooh, look at those people." Okay, pace means a step. So it says they're just a few paces away. Okay, so they're just a few steps away. The rusty hinges. So a hinge is a part of a door or a gate that helps it to open. And rusty is this color, this orangish color, and it's like creak because it hasn't been opened in a long time. So the rusty hinges swing open. Out he comes. All right, so what happened? The 5 winners and their families are waiting for the chocolate factory to open. And then Willy Wonka comes out. Okay, good times, party times. We will continue with this story later on. I hope you are enjoying it so far. Take care until next time.